The afternoon sun hung low over the sprawling ranch, casting long shadows across the dusty pastures. I was out by the fence, fixing a loose post that my stubborn mare, Daisy, kept testing like she was auditioning for an escape artist gig. The air was quiet except for the occasional buzz of cicadas and the distant hum of a small plane. Nothing unusual, since we were under the flight path for the regional airport about 20 miles east. Then the engine noise changed. It sputtered, coughed, and then let out a sound like a dying lawnmower before cutting out entirely. My head snapped up just in time to see the little Cessna wobble in the sky, its nose dipping dangerously low. "Aw, hell," I muttered, dropping the hammer. The plane veered sharply, disappearing behind the tree line at the far end of my property. A second later, a bone-rattling crunch echoed across the land, followed by the unmistakable sound of metal groaning against dirt. I didn't even think, just sprinted for my ATV, keys already in hand. The engine roared to life, and I tore across the field, kicking up dust as I went. By the time I reached the wreck, my heart was pounding hard enough to crack ribs. The plane had plowed into the soft earth of the back pasture, its nose crumpled like a beer can, one wing bent at a sickening angle. Smoke curled from the engine, but thankfully no flames. The cockpit door creaked open and a man stumbled out, clutching his arm. His face was pale, streaked with sweat and dirt, but he was alive. "You okay?" I called, jumping off the ATV. "Alive," he gasped, wincing. "Engine failure, had to put her down, didn't mean to land on your property." "Better my dirt than a tree," I said, gripping his shoulder to steady him. "You need an ambulance?" Before he could answer, a shrill voice cut through the air like a rusty saw. "What is going on here?" I didn't even have to turn around to know who it was. Karen Whitmore, president of the HOA from hell, self-appointed sheriff of suburban decorum, and the reason I'd gotten 3 violation notices last month for excessive pasture weeds. She marched toward us in pristine white sneakers, her phone already out, finger hovering over the screen like she was about to call in an airstrike. "Ma'am, there's been an accident," the pilot said weakly. Karen ignored him, her beady eyes locked on the wreckage. "This is private property. You can't just crash planes wherever you want." I stepped between them. "Lady, the man's bleeding." "You mind dialing down the crazy for 5 seconds?" Her face turned the same shade as a boiled lobster. "I knew this would happen. I told the HOA your land was a hazard. And now look, unauthorized aircraft, destruction of property, destruction of—" I stared at her. "You think he meant to crash?" She jabbed a finger at me. "You're responsible for what happens on your land, Jason, and I'm calling the police." Without another word, she punched 911 into her phone and started shrieking about reckless landowners and illegal air traffic. The pilot blinked at me. "Is she serious?" I sighed. "Oh, she's always serious." In the distance, sirens wailed. But something told me the cops were going to be the least of Karen's problems. The distant wail of sirens grew louder, cutting through the thick Texas air. Karen stood with her arms crossed, a smug look plastered on her face like she'd just single-handedly prevented a national disaster. The pilot, who'd introduced himself as Greg, leaned against my ATV, pressing a wad of gauze from my first aid kit against a nasty cut on his forearm. "Ma'am, I promise you, this wasn't intentional," Greg said, his voice strained. "I lost power and had to put it down somewhere flat before I—" "Save it for the authorities," Karen snapped, not even glancing his way. Her phone was still recording, her bony finger pointing at the wreckage like it was a crime scene. "This is exactly why we have zoning laws. You can't just turn private property into some backwoods airstrip." I rolled my eyes so hard I nearly saw my own brain. "Karen, for the last time, nobody turned anything into an airstrip. The man's plane fell out of the sky." She opened her mouth to fire back, but the crunch of gravel under tires cut her off. 2 sheriff's deputies pulled up in a cloud of dust, followed closely by an ambulance. The moment they stepped out, Karen launched herself at them like a heat-seeking missile. "Finally, I've been waiting for an officer to arrive. This man," she jabbed a finger at Greg, "illegally landed an aircraft on private property and she swung her accusing finger toward me, allowed it to happen." The older deputy, A grizzled man with a salt and pepper mustache sighed like he'd heard this song before. "Ma'am, let's take it one step at a time." He turned to Greg. "You the pilot?" Greg nodded. "Yes, sir. Engine failure. I had to make an emergency landing." The deputy glanced at the wrecked Cessna, then back at Greg's bloodied arm. "You need medical attention?" Before Greg could answer, Karen butted in. "That's not the issue here. The issue is the blatant disregard for HOA regulations. This ranch is already an eyesore, and now we have plane crashes?" The younger deputy pinched the bridge of his nose. "Ma'am, with all due respect, an emergency landing isn't an HOA matter." Karen's face turned an impressive shade of purple. "It is when it violates community safety standards," just as she was winding up for another rant. A black SUV with government plates rolled up, kicking up dust. Two men in crisp navy blue windbreakers stepped out, their badges glinting in the sunlight. FAA. Karen's triumphant smirk faltered. The taller agent flashed his credentials. "Federal Aviation Administration. We got word of an incident." Greggy straightened up immediately. "I'm the pilot, declared an emergency after total power loss." The agents nodded and moved toward the wreckage, but Karen wasn't done. She planted herself in their path. "Excuse me, but this is a residential matter. The HOA has strict rules about—" The FAA agent didn't even break stride. "Ma'am, step aside. This is a federal investigation now," Karen spluttered. "You can't just ignore local ordinances." The agent paused, giving her a look usually reserved for misbehaving toddlers. "Ma'am, aviation law supersedes homeowner association bylaws. Now, unless you were on board that aircraft, you need to stay clear of the crash site." "I couldn't help it," I snorted. Karen whirled on me, her eyes blazing. "This isn't over, Jason. Mark my words, the HOA will be taking action." The younger deputy sighed. "Ma'am, maybe you should let the professionals handle this." But Karen was already stomping back toward her spotless crossover SUV, muttering about government overreach and lawsuits. Greg exhaled, shaking his head. "I've had smoother landings in war zones." I clapped him on the shoulder. "Welcome to the neighborhood." The FAA agent glanced at me. "You the property owner?" "Yep." "Good. Then you can tell us exactly where your land ends, because something tells me we're gonna be here a while." I grinned. "Oh, I've got all day." And just like that, Karen's grandstand had backfired spectacularly. The feds were here. The cops were ignoring her, and I was about to enjoy every second of it. The FAA investigators had barely started their work when Karen made her next move. She hovered at the edge of my property line, arms crossed, watching like a vulture waiting for roadkill to stop twitching. Every few minutes she'd tap furiously on her phone, probably live tweeting her version of events to her dozen followers in the HOA Facebook group. Greg sat on the tailgate of my truck, getting checked out by the paramedics while I gave my statement to the deputies. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Karen edge closer to the wreckage, her phone held up like she was filming a documentary. "Sir, you might want to keep an eye on your neighbor," the younger deputy muttered under his breath. I turned just in time to see Karen step over the police tape, bright yellow and clearly marked "Do Not Cross," and march toward the crumpled wing, the Cessna like she owned it. "Oh, this ought to be good," I said, crossing my arms. One of the FAA agents, a no-nonsense woman with a sharp ponytail, spotted Karen immediately. "Ma'am, this is an active investigation site. You need to step back." Karen didn't even flinch. "I'm documenting violations for the Homeowners Association," she announced, as if that explained everything. She reached out and poked the bent wing with her finger. The FAA agent's eyes widened. "Do not touch the wreckage. That's federal evidence," Karen scoffed. "It's on private property. I have a right to inspect hazards in our community." The agent's voice turned to steel. "Ma'am, this is an NTSB-regulated crash site. Interfering with an investigation is a federal offense." Karen rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, I'm just taking pictures." She leaned in closer, snapping a photo of the tail number. That's when it happened. Her foot caught on a twisted piece of fuselage and she stumbled forward, right into the wreckage. Her designer sunglasses went flying as she flailed, knocking loose a chunk of debris that clattered to the ground. The entire investigative team froze. For a second, nobody moved. Then the lead FAA agent strode forward, his face like thunder. You're done. Karen blinked, straightening up. Excuse me? The agent pulled out his badge again. You just tampered with an active federal investigation. You're under detainment for questioning. Karen's face went slack. What? I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. Greg, still sitting on the tailgate, coughed loudly into his fist. You can't be serious, Karen shrieked. I was just stepping over police tape, ignoring direct orders, and compromising evidence. The agent finished. He motioned to one of the deputies. Sheriff, you mind? The older deputy sighed and walked over, pulling out his cuffs. Ma'am, you need to come with us. Karen's Mo. Her, on the other hand? He smirked. She's gonna need a lawyer. Greg let out a low whistle. I've crashed planes in 3 states, and this is the wildest aftermath I've ever seen. I grinned. Stick around. The show's just getting started. The next few days were pure chaos and pure satisfaction. News of Karen's little federal mishap spread through the neighborhood faster than a grease fire. By sunrise the next morning, the local news had picked up the story. HOA board member faces federal charges after tampering with plane crash investigation. I was sipping my coffee on the porch when my phone buzzed with a text from my buddy Dave down at the sheriff's office. You're not going to believe this. Karen's getting hit with a $10,000 fine for obstruction. FAA doesn't play. I nearly spat out my coffee. Greg, who'd been crashing in my guest room while the insurance sorted out his wrecked plane, wandered outside, rubbing his bandaged arm. You look way too happy for this early in the morning. I showed him the text. His eyebrows shot up. 10 grand? Damn, that's more than my deductible. Worth every penny, I chuckled. But the real entertainment came later that afternoon when the HOA emergency meeting was called. Normally, I wouldn't be caught dead at one of those things, but this. Oh, I wasn't missing it. I parked my truck right next to Karen's spotless SUV and strolled into the community center like I owned the place. The room was packed. Half the neighborhood had shown up, whispering behind their hands as Karen stood at the front, face red, hands clenched into fists. The HOA president, a weary-looking man named Bob, cleared his throat. All right, folks, let's settle down. We're here to discuss the incident involving one of our board members. Karen immediately launched into her defense. This is a witch hunt. I was acting in the best interest of the community. That plane crash was a clear violation of... Karen, Bob interrupted, rubbing his temples. You were arrested by the feds, a woman in the back snorted, and filmed yelling at an FAA agent about sovereign citizen rights. That video's at like 50,000 views on TikTok. Karen's eye twitched. That's not the point. The point is that Jason's property is a hazard. First the weeds, then the unapproved livestock fencing. Now aircraft. What's next? A UFO landing pad? I leaned back in my chair, grinning. If it pisses you off, I'll consider it. The room erupted into laughter. Even some of Karen's usual allies were shaking their heads. Bob held up a hand. Look, the FAA already cleared Jason. Emergency landings aren't a zoning violation. And as for the rest, he sighed. Karen, maybe it's best if you step down from the board for a while. Karen's jaw dropped. What? A chorus of eyes went up around the room. Even the old lady who'd once reported me for excessive bird feeders voted against her. Karen looked like she'd been slapped. This is unbelievable. After all I've done for this neighborhood. Yeah, like getting us all subpoenaed when... You sued the mailman for trespassing, someone muttered. That was the last straw. Karen snatched up her designer purse and stormed out, heels clicking like gunshots. The room burst into applause the second the door slammed behind her. Greg, who'd come along for the show, whistled low. Damn, and I thought my life was dramatic. Bob walked over and clapped me on the shoulder. Jason, for the record, nobody's filing any more complaints about your ranch. Just try to keep the plane crashes to a minimum, all right? I smirked. No promises. As we walked out, Greg nudged me. So what now? I glanced at Karen's SUV peeling out of the parking lot. Now, we celebrate. And we did, with cold beers, grilled steaks, and the sweet, sweet sound of karma doing its coca. The weeks that followed were some of the most peaceful I'd had in years. With Karen officially ousted from the HOA board and slapped with federal fines, the neighborhood had gone eerily quiet. No more violation notices in my mailbox. No more passive-aggressive letters about my unsightly pasture grass. Even the EI's local mailman started waving at me again instead of speed-walking past my gate like I was running a meth lab. Greg stuck around longer than expected. Turned out the insurance payout from his wrecked Cessna was enough to buy an even older, even more questionable plane. A beat-up Piper Cub he affectionately named the Comeback Kid. He offered to take me up in it as thanks for letting him crash. At my place. Literally. Just promise me you won't put this one in my field, I said, eyeing the duct tape holding part of the wing together. Greg grinned. No guarantees. But hey, if I do, at least we know the HOA won't hassle you about it. Karen, meanwhile, had gone radio silent. Rumor had it she'd hired some high-priced lawyer to fight the FAA fines, but federal bureaucracy moves slower than a cow on Quaaludes. Last I heard, she'd put her house up for sale. Sudden relocation, the listing said, though everyone knew it was sudden humiliation. Then, one Saturday morning, I got the text that made my whole year. Dave again. Check the county court docket. Karen just got hit with community service. 200 hours. Judge made her volunteer at the animal shelter. I laughed so hard I scared my chickens. The irony was beautiful. Karen, who'd once called animal control on my excessive rooster noise, now scooping poop at the county shelter. I may have driven past a few times just to watch her scrunch her nose at the smell of wet dog while wearing a neon orange vest. Greg and I celebrated by buzzing her house, legally, at proper altitude, but low enough that the Piper's shadow passed right over her for sale sign. I like to think she heard it. By the time summer rolled around, Karen's house sold to a young couple with 2 kids and a very enthusiastic Labrador retriever. The first time I met them, the wife apologized in advance for any noise from the dog. I just smiled. Honey, after the last owner, you could throw raves in there and I wouldn't care. The HOA, now under new management, quietly dropped all pending violations against my property. Bob even stopped by one day with a 6-pack and asked if I'd consider joining the board. I'd rather wrestle a greased pig, I told him. He nodded like he'd expected that answer. Worth a shot. As for Greg, he's still around, surprisingly. Turns out he liked the area, and having a free place to park his plane didn't hurt. We built a proper hangar on the far side of the property, which the new HOA approved without a single complaint. Sometimes, when the weather's right, we'll take the Piper up and fly lazy circles over the neighborhood. And if we happen to pass Karen's new place, a cramped condo complex with strict HOA rules, well, let's just say the wing dip we do is purely coincidental. The ranch is quieter now. The fences are fixed. The grass grows where it pleases. And the only drama comes from Daisy the mare's latest escape attempts. But every now and then, when the wind's just right, I swear I can still hear the distant echo of Karen shrieking about jurisdiction, and I smile every time.